Bonsoir à tous. Je vous souhaite la bienvenue au Pavillon du Canada à la COP 15 et merci d'être avec nous ce soir. Je m'appelle Véronique Gagnon, je suis la gestionnaire principale du Pavillon du Canada. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Canada Pavilion at COP 15 and thank you for being with us tonight. My name is Véronique Gagnon. I'm the manager of the Canada Pavilion. It's a pleasure for me to introduce our next event, Innovations to Better Integrate Biodiversity Conservation and Poverty Reduction, the case of populations in forest zones of West Africa, hosted by the Centre d'études et de coopération internationale. C'est avec plaisir que je vous présente notre prochain événement, Innovation pour mieux intégrer la conservation de la biodiversité et la réduction de la pauvreté, cas des populations des zones de forêt d'Afrique de l'Ouest, organisé par le Centre d'études et de coopération internationale, CECI. Cet événement sera animé par Philippe Fragnier, chargé de projet, conseiller en environnement et adaptation au changement climatique. Au cours des 5 dernières années, M. Fragnier a assuré le leadership au sein du CECI afin de définir la vision et les orientations programmatiques de femmes actrices clés de l'adaptation au changement climatique, une des priorités du cadre stratégique de la théorie du changement de l'organisation. Veuillez vous joindre à moi pour accueillir M. Fragnier.
Merci. Merci Véronique. Bonsoir tout le monde. Good evening. Thank you for being with us, even if we're a bit early compared to the planned schedule. The question we want to address and to discuss tonight is how relevant is it to integrate a better knowledge of biodiversity in local development planning and poverty reduction? And so the question came from designing some projects with a poverty reduction focus at community level in the context of ecosystem degradation in different landscapes in West Africa. And as we know, a large proportion of population living in rural areas in West Africa depend on natural resources for their livelihoods and food security. Several ecosystems in this region have a very high level of plant and animal biodiversity, including the Guinean forest, which extends from Guinea to Cameroon and are described as a biodiversity hotspot. Although the region is still relatively unknown globally for large groups of species, this biodiversity is threatened by human activities and impacted by current and projected climate change, mainly increasing average temperatures and irregularity in rainfall. So we are proposing to discuss that situation by considering DNA barcoding as an efficient technique to develop a better knowledge of local biodiversity and contributing in some way to a baseline for the region, and also addressing a local experience in Ghana of integration of nature and biodiversity conservation in local community development. And the third part is how to develop incentives for biodiversity, increased knowledge, and conservation in local development with communities. So just to note that CECI, with key partners, including World University Service of Canada and IUCN, C4ICRAF, Rocha Ghana, and the Center for Biodiversity Genomics of the University of Guelph, have developed recent projects and have more in preparation around that concept in West Africa, in Haiti, and in Asia. So it's my pleasure to introduce our 3 speakers for today. We'll have first Mr. Daryl Bosu from Rocha Ghana, then Mr. Sujeevan, I have to make sure I read it well, Ratnasingham from Guelph University, and Mrs. Paola Agostini of the World Bank. So I will give you a short biography of each of them, and then we'll go with the presentations. And so the 3 presentations will last each 10 minutes, and we'll have more or less 20 minutes of discussion after. So Daryl Bosu from Rocha Ghana is an environment sustainability and natural resource management and governance practitioner and an activist with 15 years diverse experience working on green business ideas, contributing to the development of nature and people-centered low emissions development. He is currently the Deputy National Director of Rocha Ghana, where he provides strategic planning and operational support to their teams working across the country. Good to have you with us. Sujeevan Ratnasingham is a bioinformatician with 17 years of experience leading innovative projects in the research and commercial sectors. He is the chief architect of the BOLD, the Barcode of Life Data Systems, and MBRAVE, Multiplex Barcode Research and Visualization Environment, data platforms. That's quite... He's the founder of Life Scanner, a DNA barcoding company, and he works for the Center for Biodiversity Genomics. And we have also with us, so Sujeevan, pleasure to have you with us, I'm sorry, yes. And we also have Paola Agostini. So Paola is lead natural resource management specialist in the World Bank's Europe and Central Asia region environment, natural resource and blue economy global practice. She leads programs and projects in Central Asia that help green transition and green finance, climate adaptation, reverse land degradation, and increase resilience of people, ecosystems, and infrastructures. And before working in that part of the world, Paola has worked in a program called TER Africa, a regional partnership program in over 26 sub-Saharan countries. And so that's the link, of course, with the region that we are targeting. So, because we have only 1 hour, so I will pass the floor to Mr. Daryl Bosu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippe, for the opportunity, and also to all of you here, good evening. I am going to share with you case studies from 3 very important protected areas in Ghana. And you'll get to know Mole National Park, which is one of actually Ghana's largest protected area, located in the Savannah region of the country, providing significant benefits to communities who very much depend on the land. And this national park has got not the big 5 that you know, but at least 4 of them you get in this area, except, of course, the rhinoceros, which is not found in this particular area. And the communities around this protected area actually depend on this particular area for their food, for their medicine, for their building materials. Everything you can think of, they depend on the land. A study we conducted using the Forest and Poverty Toolkit by ProForest also showed that everything that is in this forest is much more important to this forest, is more the ecosystem services. And so communities identify with this protected area because of the services they get from there. They pick, if you know also about shea butter, this is what communities get also from this landscape. So their creams to make them look beautiful, for their hair, for their cooking, it all comes from these areas. So an area like this is very crucial to livelihoods of these people, as well as also their day-to-day needs for medicine and for food and for everything else. And then also, I take you to one of Ghana's most important ecological hotspots, which is called the Atiwa Forest, located in the eastern region of Ghana. This forest reserve is a source of water for over 5 million people. And it's a forest reserve that has got so many endemic species, and the late E.O. Wilson described this forest as one of the key areas out of 35 forest reserves in the world where you can see significant biodiversity in an upland evergreen ecosystem. So to us in Ghana, without these forests, a significant proportion, Ghana is about 30 million in population. So if 5 million of our water services, 5 million people are being served by water service from this particular forest, then it's an area that you are not going to joke with. Then again, I also introduce you to our 540-kilometer long coastal area, of which is also surrounded by mangrove ecosystems, providing habitat for both sea turtles and also serving as spawning grounds for fishes and a lot of the things that communities around these coastal areas depend on. The picture you see right here is a community known as Keita, and this community very recently, as a result of the increasing sea level rises, were faced with floods and they had to move out of their communities, all because ecosystem services that are being provided by the mangroves that are located in these areas have been depleted by activities of removing these mangroves for firewood and for other services. So you can clearly see that these these forest reserves, they provide significant service to the people in terms of helping them to address flood risks, providing them food services, and in the case of the Atiwa Forest Reserve, providing them significant water services, which is crucial for a country like Ghana. And the question is, if these areas are so crucial to the people, how do we ensure that the biodiversity that exists in these areas are maintained, sustained, to ensure that they continue to provide the services that are most needed to help in securing these areas for their own benefit? So in certain cases where the land is open and it's savanna, you can deploy technologies like using event book and also community participation, camera traps and drones. And in other cases, we have also deployed ODK. These are open apps and software that we have used in assessing the biodiversity in this area. And in another cases also, in the case of the Atiwa Forest, where the species live in a forest ecosystem, it is very difficult to find them. We have also been able, through technology like eDNA, to be able to sample what is there and helps us to find very cryptic species. And we have used this kind of information to actually feed the community desire to be part of the monitoring and protection of the species in this area. At the same time, we have used the data from this eDNA results to feed our application for a key biodiversity area designation. We so need to protect this forest. One reason why this particular forest needs to be protected is the fact that government has recently been very interested in mining the bauxite that is underneath this forest. And to make the case for government, we needed to prove that there is significant biodiversity, which is providing significant ecosystem services. At the same time, we needed to show that this forest, if protected in the long term, could continue to sustain Ghana's need for water services and also its contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. So the eDNA for us has been very instrumental and has helped us to be able to involve community people in data collection, monitoring of threats, and at the same time, input the information into what we call the Global Biodiversity Information Framework, which has become more or less a risk measure for most of the mining companies who are interested to jump onto the government's interest to mine the bauxite in this area. Now, this provides for you some of the data we collected from the forest reserve. You can see the red spot, which shows the various areas we deploy the eDNA sampling data, and it provides information on, and basically it's just simple sample gathering from water resources within the area. And one good thing about this particular tool is the fact that it's non-destructive. You can go to the ground, unlike other sampling methods where you need to cut transects in forest reserves. You need to sometimes even set up some, I would say, traps and all of that. With eDNA, you don't have to really do a lot of destructive sampling. And this for us is very crucial. Again, if you look at the methodology of data gathering, you can easily involve community. And this is the very approach that was used in collecting some of the data samples from this side. Now, this information is so significant for these communities because it helps us to know what is there, what can be protected, and what also we can take advantage of to develop other livelihood opportunities, which are crucial incentives to help these communities living around these protected areas to get themselves involved to manage some of these areas. And again, for us in determining what is possible, what needs to be protected, we can never do that without the participation of the various gender groups in this particular area. So this is a case where communities within the Mole area in particular target the production and value addition to the share value chain, which is mostly a privy of women, and we deliberately target that value chain so that we can give the women in this particular instance an opportunity to be able to participate, not only in data monitoring, but also in livelihood interventions that provide them incentives for the activities that are needed to secure these protected areas. Another incentive opportunity that we explored in this landscape also has to do with other non-timber forest products, and all of these you need data and information to help you to be able to assess these things. Incentivizing communities to protect what is in their landscape is so crucial that at the end of the day, if you have the data and you can protect and beef that up with some sort of incentives, then you realize that the communities eventually lose interest. So for all that we do, we try to connect the livelihood of the people to the ecosystem service that is there through some sort of agreement with the companies that are interested to take some of the products in the landscape. If it is a mining company in areas, they have explored options of offsetting and also some options of supporting the community with payment for ecosystem services. In other areas, the communities have been directly involved in the value chain where they pay conservation premiums to a conservation trust fund, which then enables the community to assess, and they use that for further data gathering and also monitoring activities within the area, and also preventing illegal activities that jeopardize the integrity of these ecosystems. I'm happy to explore further how these incentives are being realized as we discuss further in the panel. Thank you very much.
Waiting on the slide to change over, maybe. Oh, that's strange. There we go. Philippe, thank you for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. I want to start off with a little bit of background. Hopefully, with the limited amount of time, I'll rush through it. So as Philippe indicated, I'm affiliated with the Center for Biodiversity Genomics, but the Center for Biodiversity Genomics is part of a much larger consortium called the International Barcode of Life, or IBOL. And IBOL has a simple mission, and challenging mission, which is to implement a global biomonitoring framework that can be used by everyone anywhere. So our motivation is obvious. We're seeing dramatic declines in both biomass and diversity across the planet. But what's even more alarming about these numbers is that they only present the tip of the iceberg. We don't really get a sense of which species we've lost because there's so little we know about the life on this planet. And so the motivation for the International Barcode of Life is first to build the tools required to quickly assess and identify species on the planet. A lot of the change that we observe today is done from the heavens using remote sensing technologies, which is a very powerful tool. We can observe algal blooms, forest loss, shifts in bud burst, but there are limits to remote sensing technologies. For example, the 12 essential biodiversity variables for looking at ocean health. Only of the 12 variables, only about 4 of them can be observed and tracked using satellite technologies. The remainder require direct interaction with the environment. And this is where we feel DNA observation technologies can be used to leapfrog some of the traditional impediments, very much in the same way that mobile phones have been really effective at overcoming some of the infrastructure impediments that we see in the developing world. So by DNA observation, for the purpose of this discussion, I'm talking specifically about the DNA barcode, which is a short standardized segment of the genome, which can then be used to construct reference libraries. The beauty of this system is that it's an open standard allowing anyone to contribute to library construction and for anyone to leverage that library to do rapid biodiversity assessments. And so IBOL had confidence in this methodology, that it framed out 3 programs starting in 2009 with a 20-nation consortium to vet the method and validate it globally. And it was highly successful in doing that, so much so that it launched a new project in 2019 called Bioscan, which starts to develop the baselines required for a global biomonitoring framework. And here's how it works. There are 3 ways that you can use this technology. The first is what we call traditional DNA barcoding, going 1 specimen at a time. And this is primarily used for library construction. And then there's metabarcoding and eDNA analysis. And this is what Daryl talked about. These are the equivalent of remote sensing technologies, except on the ground, where you can capture a large amount of data from a pool of DNA. There are 2 technology platforms that allow us to do this work. On the right, I'm looking at the left over there, on the right is the SQL series of instruments from PacBio that allows for the analysis, the concurrent analysis of tens of thousands of individual specimens simultaneously. And on the left, the NovaSeq platform from Illumina that allows for the brute force analysis of large mixtures of samples, or eDNA. And there's beautiful convergence in these technologies with computational methods and instrumentation that allows for the dealing of large amounts of data that these instruments generate. And this has been so effective in driving down the cost of analysis. Today, we can generate a barcode for about a US dollar per specimen and analyze metabarcoding and eDNA samples for about $50 US per sample. And these costs are being driven down by continuous innovation. Our hope is over the coming years to drive it down considerably further. I'm going to skip over this. I know we're short on time. Some background will have to be left. The process is straightforward for barcoding. You start with a specimen. This is for library construction. The sample and data follow 2 different paths. The data from each collection gets uploaded to our Informatics platform, the Barcode of Life Data Systems, which is a public platform and available to anyone. The tissue gets sampled and sent to a lab where the DNA is extracted, amplified, and sequenced, and then is reconnected with the record. And this process has been done millions of times over and over with researchers around the world. In fact, at my last count, there are over 25,000 registered users of BOLD that have been involved in one or more parts of this process. Now, a key challenge that we have with taxonomy is the lack of taxonomic expertise. The BOLD platform has a solution for this, where we've introduced an algorithmic taxonomic system called the Barcode of Life, called the Barcode Index Number System. So instead of a name, you get a serial number. The system infers that something is a new species and gives it an identifier, allowing for experts to then later on come in and add a name. But while they're doing that, these entities can then be used to track observations and look at change over time. And so using these combinations of technologies, we can do rapid species observations, surveys going anywhere, collecting specimens, barcoding specimens, and assigning a bin. And using this approach since 2005, we've covered the globe with our data collection efforts. But a notable point is that Africa if you look at Africa, especially West Africa, has very limited coverage. And so as part of this project, we'd like to elevate the amount of data that's available there. We really need to put some effort towards this region in terms of generating some baselines. So for the rest of this discussion, hopefully if time allows, I'd like to talk about not three, but two case studies. I want to talk about biodiversity baselines and sustainable agriculture and how this technology is being used in those contexts. So for biodiversity baselines, a really good example is the work that we did in Kruger National Park, which is one of the most famous and largest national parks in Africa. Kruger National Park had very little data in terms of both observation and genetic data. And we use these collection devices over on the left side of the screen. They're called malaise traps. They are passive sample collection devices. Very much as Daryl indicated, the ability to collect samples without disruption is very important in these environments. And so we deployed in partnership with park rangers and the African Center for DNA Barcoding at the University of Johannesburg. We deployed 26 traps throughout and collected samples over a long period of time. And the data that we collected was made available to all the participants, including the rangers, who added useful observational context on the ground, and was left with them for a period of time before being released to the public. And what we found was actually quite interesting. There are two ecozones. I won't spend too much time on the science on this, but there are two ecozones, the Mopani woodlands in the low-veld region. And what we found was that the low-veld was captured most of the biodiversity of flying arthropods. But the Mopani was a close second. But if we look over here on the right, this is a similarity visualization of all the different sites. Although each one of the regions have greater similarity, what we see is that every site has a lot of unique diversity. If you had low variation, those terminal branches would be very flat. So it provides very useful context without even getting down to the low level about how one might conserve the diversity in a given region. I'm going to skip over the Costa Rican example and talk very briefly about our work with McCain Foods and their farms of the future. And so what we're doing with them is providing them with DNA barcoding tools to look at two factors. One, soil health and the impact of their farming practices on the environment around the farms. And so using DNA technologies and DNA barcoding, they're able to look at soil arthropods and soil organisms to track changes over time, look at creating reservoirs for diversity, as well as factors related to the woodlands around their farms. And this is particularly important because they can see fine-scale changes as well as long-term trends that go beyond simply yield calculations. Because yield calculations may be year by year, but on a multi-decadal scale, seeing beneath the surface is really critical to build good models. So just to wrap it up, I want to address the key ingredients that we need to be able to scale this out globally. One is sequencing infrastructure, and we've got a lot of it at the University of Guelph, at the Center for Biodiversity Genomics, and we've been building out standard processes and standard collections of systems, and these are being scaled out across the world. In the UK, a new center has adopted these methods in Europe, but we recognize that the same solutions don't work everywhere. But fortunately, the informatics, the software platforms do. We are deploying these platforms not just centrally, but also in a distributed fashion around the world. But with regard to providing independence and local access to this technology, one area we're focusing on is making the lab portable. And so we've started to develop a portable lab in a box that really enables rapid deployment of labs in local regions with limited infrastructure investment, and importantly, without compromising on the low cost. Obviously doesn't benefit from the industrial scale of the large labs that we looked at, but it will critically change what can be done in a local region. So with these methods, we can support all aspects of the production chain from acquisition to sharing the data with the appropriate participants. So I'll just close really quickly on a video about the Bioscan project, and I'll leave it there. Thank you. I think we'll need some audio. Could we get some audio on that?
Our living planet, Our living planet, a library of life. Every species, like a book, holding the information for humanity's greatest innovations. New medicines, technologies, and economic development. But we are burning those books before we've even read them. We want to know all life, every species. We are the International Barcode of Life Consortium, and we are illuminating biodiversity through DNA-based analysis. By using automation and rapidly evolving DNA sequencing technology, we are bringing this vision to life. Our new scientific program, Bioscan, is shedding light on unknown species, tracking their distribution, abundance, and interactions. Bioscan will bring us closer to building a complete library of life, forming the basis for an Earth observation system. Together, we must act. We are not just scientists. We are rangers in national parks collecting the data required to monitor ecosystems. We are indigenous peoples protecting our lands and traditions for future generations. We are citizens rearing caterpillars to support science and conservation in our country. This is Bioscan, collecting, mapping, and revealing life's diversity. Our species acting to protect all species before we lose the possibility of even knowing them.
Thank you very much. I want to say that it was really, you're bringing back some incredible memories because my PhD dissertation was on Kruger National Park. So it's fantastic to see, in these many years, how things have changed in terms of monitoring biodiversity. And one of my first World Bank projects when I was a young task team leader was on Mole National Park in Ghana. So fantastic. Let me now share with you some example on how we can actually work with community and what are some incentives the community have to conserve nature. And based on the experience that I had in these many 25 years at the World Bank and in different regions. So why do we need to do this? If you live, this is a map that shows to you from IPBES the amount of degraded lands we have in the world. You have more than 2 billion hectares of degraded land. So we need to do something to conserve biodiversity for many reasons that we all know in here, but mainly really working for the resilience of our communities and our planet and climate change. How do we want to do that? We need a landscape approach. You cannot do only conservation in protected areas. You need to involve communities. You need to look at the mosaic of lands that goes from the protected areas to the agricultural land, going through the degraded lands to the areas where you have livestock. You need to bring it all together. Otherwise, if we don't connect conservation with production, conservation with the community livelihood, we will not succeed. Because people need to eat, need to live, need to use the natures. So we need to really connect, and that's the landscape approach that I mean. Starting really focusing on sustainable land and water management, which are the key for conservation. Now, it's durable for poverty reductions, for increased shared prosperity, which are really the missions of the World Bank. So let me just give you a couple of examples. Here is a program that we just started in Central Asia. So I'm taking you from a very different part of the world. On the left, you have the hotspots of land degradation in Central Asia. And as you can see, they are mainly on the borders of these 5 countries. And so we designed a program called the Resilient Landscape, Resilient in Central Asia, 1 project in each country to address these land degradation issues. But we need to do it together with the communities. So what we do, we have, in the case of Central Asia, we look at matching grants for creating natural resource enterprises, small and micro enterprises with community, so that they have an incentive to look after the important biodiversity that they have there. I saw that also in Ghana, there are some examples of that with the shea butter, with the honey. The same thing is here, where the important biodiversity is linked, is agro-biodiversity. Is the Central Asia is the center of all the fruit trees in the world. So all the apples that you eat are actually the genome, or I might use the wrong word, but everything started in Central Asia. Same thing for pistachio or many of the nuts that you eat. So really working with them in saving this important and making it an enterprise so it becomes sustainable in the future, also financially. It's important. At the same time, because there is so much degraded land, another incentive is to work with community with green wager program, hiring communities to restore degraded lands. That's another important short-term, if you want, employment opportunity, but extremely important to really get some immediate benefits, if you want, to the communities, so that they become your allies in reversing land degradation. Let me give you now another example, this one from Costa Rica. So Costa Rica is very famous for their program on payment of environmental services. As you can see on the right, you have Costa Rica in the 40s, was a very forested country. Little by little, because of agriculture and especially livestock, they have destroyed their forest. And you can see that the forest cover in the 80s went down to about 20%. So Costa Rica woke up and said, we cannot do that. We cannot destroy our natural capital. So they did a few policy interventions. So one important was to eliminate cattle subsidies, which was what really was incentivizing to have a lot of cattle ranching programs. They instituted a payment of environmental services system, very effective, paying communities to add trees to degraded landscape or to conserve the little forest they have. And they finance it through a tax on gasoline, basically. And little by little, you see that the forest cover started to come back in Costa Rica. And it's now even over 60%. And Costa Rica is one of the most famous ecotourism destinations in the world. So what you see on the right is actually called the striptease of Costa Rica. He went naked from his forest and then dressed back through all these systems. And this is what they did, adding trees and paying people for doing that, and while allowing cattle to be there. So it's really, again, this mix of conservation and production, bringing it together, which is a key in terms of development and poverty alleviation. But not only that, what are our incentives? You need to have a public-private partnership. So something we have been working with is the Cocoa and Forest Initiative. And again, here, the example of Ghana and the Ivory Coast, but even in Colombia or in Ecuador. We are joining our efforts together with some of the most important chocolate companies in the world. And the idea is that they will only buy cocoa from farmers that are not degrading the land. So cocoa that is shade-grown cocoa, cocoa that has trees on their farms. So why is that an incentive? Because they are paying more, because they are working directly with communities, and we are bringing together communities and private sector in this Cocoa and Forest Initiative. The same thing is, as another example, in Colombia. In Colombia, we are working with some of the most important supermarkets, like Éxito, who is going to buy meat only coming from silvopastoral system, which means, again, cattle ranching that is not degrading, that has trees in there, that also allow biodiversity outcome to be considered, and they pay a premium to communities for all that. But other forms of incentives for the community are linked to REDD+. REDD+ is this mechanism for reducing emission from degradation and of the forest and deforestation, and you basically pay community for either reversing forest degradation or keeping in some way the forest intact. So there is a lot of carbon payments related to that, with a lot of important biodiversity outcome associated with it. Another form, which is very important as an incentive that we tried in many countries in Africa, is to turn people who used to be, by using technology like simple technology like the camera traps, that not only help to identify biodiversity, but helped us in some countries to identify poachers, turning these poachers into rangers. So giving them opportunities for really, they know the forest, they know the biodiversity, and really giving them a permanent job and giving them an acceptance by the society that they, a different role, if you want, in the society. It's a very important incentive in terms of really, conserving biodiversity. And the last example are biodiversity offsets. This is in Cameroon, for example, where there was a very important hydropower that was built in Lompangar that had a lot of very bad, actually, biodiversity effects. So we needed to compensate that, but it was a very important dam, and it could be done in the case of mining as well. So you offset that with some, protecting a forest, creating a protected area in a very similar place. It's your last resort, right? You don't want to do that first. Only it's a residual after you have done a lot of other mitigation effort. But you can do it, and as part of the offsets, you need to give community livelihood benefits to the communities that are going to be involved and that maybe their livelihood is otherwise affected by creating a new protected areas. So you need to think about hiring them, you need to think about giving them opportunities and incentives for continuing working with you because their livelihood is impacted. So just my last slides. I hope that now when you think about all these 2 billion hectares of degraded land, it's actually 2 billion hectares of landscape restoration opportunities if you work jointly with the communities and if you create incentive for the communities to work on that. And from that, we need 3 things. We need to work on policies with government. We need to have a better knowledge and better data and work on things like all your DNA, which is an impressive, really, system of results-based monitoring, and you need then investment like the government put the money and the financial institution like the World Bank where biodiversity is. Thank you very much.
I think the round of applause for the three of them, please. Thank you. And well, we did quite well. Daryl was the best one. He was short. But we still have 15 minutes. But so I think I will open the floor directly for questions. Please keep your questions short if you can. If you make comments, don't do them too long, please. So it's open to you. Is there? Yes. And how do we? Oh, you stand, please, and use this microphone.
My name is Seth, and I'm also from Ghana. My question is, at least to the World Bank, and you've shown, beautifully the way the community, and we agree that it's landscape management and approach. And you see that, civil society organizations such as, mine, are in the community, working with the community in the landscape, showing impact. But usually, your programs don't recognize, in terms of resources, civil society organizations. It goes to government. How is that being addressed? I mean, we've been a big critic of that. How is that going to, how are you considering that? And maybe a change in policy, because impact is demonstrated on the ground and mostly through the CSOs.
Let me just go here. Thank you very much for the question. I mean, yes, you're right. The World Bank lends money to the governments, and that cannot be changed for the moment. But we have a lot of work that we do to make sure that the government really works also with the civic society. And the mechanism can really be designed so that as part of the implementation mechanism, whoever ministry is in charge can also contract NGOs and civic society that are the ones who are the grassroots, that are close to the communities, to actually do part of the implementation of the projects. So we have a lot of examples in different parts of the world of that, but it requires a lot of conversations between the World Bank, the government, and the civic society organization. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is that we do have some grant money that actually can be given to civil society organizations because it's grant money. So for example, in Central Asia, we are using an organization called CAREC that can implement part of our projects. Right now, I'm going to meet with a Snow Leopard organization again for some grants that they might get to implement, they are small grants, I mean medium-sized grants, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. They cannot be bigger, right? Because it depends on the capacity of the organization, because our fiduciary requirements are very, you need to have a sort of managed already funds. We have a lot of requirements on fiduciary things, both for the procurement and financial management, and then for something called the environmental and social framework, basically the safeguards, right? So you need to show that you can do that. So it is possible. I would invite you to absolutely, continue in trying to discuss this with your government first, and involve eventually the World Bank to see how, through our projects, the government cannot do everything. They need the civic society. So the civic society can be subcontracted to do part of it. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Paola. More questions or comments from? Yes, please.
I'll be honest, this is a slightly personal interest question. Okay, so I'm Talia, I'm working out of the University of Oxford, and we are also working in Ghana and doing metabarcoding, but dietary metabarcoding. And when you were talking about the metabarcoding you're doing in the eDNA work, you're not generating libraries that can be matched, right? And what you were talking about with the Global Malaise project and the barcode libraries that you're creating, and you had that big kind of blank spot in West Africa. Are there other projects, other than ours, generating large barcode libraries in West Africa?
Yeah, oh, it works. You're completely right. Currently, the way the entries in the reference libraries are constructed are based on voucher specimens, where your sequence has to be reinforced by a physical specimen in a formal collection. But as more and more of these metabarcoding and eDNA projects come online, we've come to realize that that standard is too strict. We can take unassigned sequences from metabarcoding projects and pull them and assign them to bins. Now, what we need to do is establish some other standards to increase the reliability of those bins, because the problem with these sequences blindly is they could be sourced from chimeras, they could be from sequencing errors. But for example, if you find exactly the same sequence from 5 different experiments in 5 very different locations, the odds of it being very real ends up being quite high. And the geographical information, occurrence information alone creates a lot of value. So I think that's the direction that we're going to end up in. Over the next year or two, those standards will be expanded. So I think you should start to see the reference libraries from those metabarcoding projects show up. Yeah, so a good way to ensure that it does is to upload your data to Embrave.
It's there.
Oh, perfect, even better.
Thank you. I have one question for Daryl. So for you, Daryl, what should prospective investors and funders take into consideration in empowering communities for sustainable biodiversity conservation? So.
Yes, thank you. I think one of the crucial things in relation to this is ensuring that we look at long-term investment. We tend to give opportunities for state actors to have long-term financing for conservation-related interventions. But when it comes to communities, we expect a 2 to 3 year project to be sufficient to make them capable to do everything. And that is where the challenge is. So we invest 4 years in a project, and then we walk away. We even talk about exit strategy. When in natural fact, these communities need long-term support to build capacity, to help them put in place logistics, and even the framework for sustainability to take place. You can't do that within 4 years in most of the projects that we have implemented across the country by ourselves and also by several other NGOs. So I think that investors should look at long-term investment in a particular locality, working with community people, and that is the only way we can make sure that whatever intervention is going to these areas are going to be sustainable. Otherwise, you finish in 2 3 years, you walk away, you realize that you are still struggling to even put in place the governance structures and the instrument. Otherwise, you're also forced to rush these processes. You rush them, and then in no time, they collapse. So we need long-term investment, not 2 to 3 years projects, as has been the norm for a long time now. Thank you.
Yeah, and of course, your organization is the link between, very often, the donors and the communities. And so it's interesting. Is there more questions from the floor? We have 2 3 minutes. Yes, please.
To thank all the panelists for these very, very encouraging examples. So, yep.
Yeah,
okay,
if you can
you.
introduce yourself, please.
So I'm Melania Cristescu, McGill University, Ecological Genomics, and the question is for Sujeevan. Just have kind of a question that tries to bring us kind of in the future. So Sujeevan, what do you think are the most important limitations that stop us from taking the DNA barcode and the DNA metabarcoding technology to truly be able to measure the heartbeat of our biodiversity at a global scale? So what are those major blocks?
Yeah, thank you, Melania. That's a very good question. If we look at a multi-decadal roadmap, for DNA barcoding to have an outsized impact, we need to address two things. One, we need to transition to a distributed model where access to the technology, not just to the data, is broadly available. Second is a big reduction in the latency from sample to answer. Now, fortunately, there are many people working on this problem. It's a shared problem with the medical industry. When you go in and get any sort of test, 20 years ago, it would have taken a lot longer to get a result, but those time frames are shrinking. So what's going to happen when both of these factors change is that we'll start to see real-time sensors in terms of DNA-based technologies, very much in the way that we have tools or devices sitting in an environment where we can continue to collect data on a long-term basis. And there are companies working on these real-time devices, biosensors, and portable DNA sequencing technologies. But I think that distributed sequencing technology is going to have the biggest impact because it'll be cheap and it'll be in everyone's hands.
Good. Well, I'd like to keep that discussion going. I'm not sure we are allowed to. What they said is that it's filmed, yeah. So, but I will try. Sarah, you'll. So I have a last question, and I think it's well, it links with the theme, the first question we had. So how can technologies like the DNA one help to make the case for investing in nature and in the roles of communities? And I'm looking to Paola. And is this something that can be supported by public or private sector?
Thank you very much for the question. I think it's actually, I didn't know about this DNA barcoding before today and DNA barcoding. I think it's fantastic. I think we at the World Bank, you know, we try to say that we are an evidence-based, results-based organization. But when it comes to biodiversity, we don't have that many tools. So this one can really be, you know, fantastic to show, you know, I don't know, did biodiversity increase in one place or in the other after our investments? And that's what we really, you know, it will be fantastic to be able to say, you know, where you are when you start the program and when you are 5, 10 years later, you know, by this investing. So I think it's a wonderful tool. Public sector definitely through our financing can you know, invest in this. I think it will bring to them wonderful results. We now have a lot of programs that are called program for results, which instead when borrowing money to do the investment, you borrow based on the results. Normally they are done, let's say, for roads or for, you know, things that are very tangible, that you can see what was done. You can have them for carbon. This is what is being tried and is working relatively okay, but we never tried it for biodiversity. So why not trying it using this DNA barcoding, for example? So I think it's absolutely a wonderful tool. Thank you.
Thank you. Daryl, do you want a final word?
I would just say that I think there are a lot of opportunities to involve communities. Even with this kind of technology, there are ways by which you get communities to experience firsthand data collection and also seeing the results. But at the same time, we need to see how these information can feed conservation, particularly helping government to value these data, both in national level data sets and also at international level. And I'm saying this because in our case, talking about the Atiwa Forest, using this eDNA information, we are making an application for a KBA, and this information is also feeding the Global Biodiversity Information Framework data set, which is a very good resource for mining companies. So they go on the site, they check a particular landscape, be able to say that this area has got all these biodiversity there, it's a no-go area, don't touch it. So I think it's very, very important that we find ways to involve more communities and scale up. I'm interested in how the technology is transferred more to governments in several countries in the sub-region, as we're talking about, but also to park management and park managers, and as well have a process to engage communities a lot more in some of these things. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think.
I'd love to add to that. So throughout this meeting, I've noticed a common thread about data gaps and the need to close a lot of data gaps in terms of building plans for restoration or risk management. And one of the most important factors about sequencing technology is that it's fast and it's consistent. Unlike many of the other approaches to data collection, it can be deployed quickly and you'll get your answers within a much shorter time frame. And I think that naturally makes it an easier option for investment, that we would see those results very quickly.
Thank you. So I think, well, it was, for me, it was interesting. I hope you enjoyed, and ask you to thank our 3 panelists, and thank you for being with us.